Welcome to Small Talk by Sfarim Chatter. I'm Nachi Weinstein. On this episode of Small Talk, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Moshe Pruzansky, who is the author of the newly published book, Making It Real, Weaving Torah Wisdom into the Fabric of Daily Life, published by Mosaic Press. This is actually his second book. The first book was titled A Dose of Inspiration, which was published through Feldheim in 2019. And also, I should mention in the beginning that Moshe and I learned Bechavrusa a number of years ago now at this point in Pesach Mesivta. So it's been a while, Moshe, but thank you for joining me on the podcast.
I appreciate you having me.
Okay, so let's start off with why another Chumash book, a sefer, if you will. I always start this small talk with, tell listeners about your book. There's so many of these Chumash Sfarim coming out now that I feel it's of utmost importance to start off all of these episodes with saying, hold on, what differentiates your work? Why another Chumash sefer in English?
So I love that you're so direct and you're jumping to the elephant in the room. And it's part of what I really enjoyed about my particular book and putting this together is because you'll tell me or not, I'm going to go through the details, but I'm convinced this is extremely unique, and it's unique in a way that'll be very gripping for readers of all backgrounds. So first and foremost, I'm the big believer, call me old-fashioned, people enjoy a piece of inspiration. It's just a question of how it's tailored. And to me, there are a couple of key ingredients that you need. I've seen often books have one or two of the ingredients. I tried to get every single one in every single chapter. So first and foremost, inspiration has to be something based on something real and genuine, not just fluff. It has to be based on legitimate sources. So I'm very proud of the fact that this book, you can see it in the acknowledgments, quotes, everything is from a concrete Torah source, both from, Rashi, Rishonim, Gemaras, Chumashim, as well as through Achronim and modern day contemporaries throughout. Everything is sourced and has a good basis. I think the second ingredient that everyone needs is, if it's too boring, it's too textual, it's not going to be very gripping, nobody's going to really remember it. I find, at least for myself, that if it has an exciting story and something that you haven't heard before and that really ties in well, that really brings the message alive. Third ingredient that I think is very important is it needs a concrete and practical and meaningful takeaway. Having inspiration with no way to implement it makes that inspiration fleeting at best and a bit hollow. So having something that's practical, okay, so now what can I do? Give me a takeaway. And I make sure to include that in every chapter as well. And last but not least, for people who are in a rush, because we know we all are, as well as for people who just want to make sure to walk away with it, like, hey, what did I just read? There needs to have a summary of some sort so that you know exactly what you got. So in this book, in every single chapter, in every single parsha, we have every single one of those ingredients. I like the idea that it's based on the parsha because, again, you have every single lesson is based on Chumash. It's based directly on the Torah. You don't get more real than that. And at the same time, it adds a convenient calendar where you can take a lesson a week. At the same time, I've had a lot of readers that have told me that they've read it cover to cover. They read it at their own pace. So that's in terms of the format and the style. If you want, I could dive into a little bit of the stories that we're seeking, which people have told me, you could have just written a storybook by itself. And I said, no, to me, it's important that we have it's deeply related to Torah, and again, those real sources, that real inspiration.
Yeah, I think we should go there because that really gets to what I generally ask first, which is tell the listeners about the book, about the sefer. And this is we'll talk a little bit more about the structure and the different, layout choices and things that you did in the book. And you actually have a page, explaining the front cover and the layout and the interior design, which is nice. And we'll talk about that. I want to get there, but let's put that on the side for a moment. And let's discuss, it's done parsha by parsha in English, and each one has a header. The Parshas Bereshis is the Amazon seller, and then actually what's nice also in the table of contents, not only do you have, so it says chapter 1 Parshas Bereshis, and the bottom of that it says the Amazon seller. That's what it's about. And then you have a short, almost like a breakdown. There are a few greater and more concrete demonstrations of one fully acknowledging that there is truly a God who runs the world and who controls one's day-to-day income than honesty. And then you go into it. So each parsha, though, has a header and you have stories. So explain what that means. You use stories. You said you could have written a storybook. What is this? How do you weave together a story together with Rishonim, Achronim, the Torah? How does that work?
I appreciate it. I appreciate pointing it out. So yeah, to your point, I tried to write this book. I put a ton of time and thought into it to make it both exciting, but also for people who are busy. I don't know about you. I'm always busy. Everyone's always busy. I tried to make this as enjoyable and easy to navigate for the busiest readers. So yeah, from that table of contents, you can just sort of glance through it, and there's a little mini summary of every single chapter in there. So you sort of see like, okay, this one speaks to me. At the end of each chapter, like I mentioned, there's a summary section as well. But as far as the stories, so I tried to, I mentioned earlier that everything should have a source. I tried to follow from the source of the Dubna Magid. As we know, the Dubna Magid would take important stories, important lessons and would bring them to life by bringing stories. So I tried to bring a whole list. I'll give you a couple examples, and then if you want, we can dive into one specifically. But I used a photograph that won the Pulitzer Prize in 1969 and how it highlights an angle regarding the dangers of lashon hara that you may have never considered. And I'm going to point that as we go through. I tried to apply to a diverse crowd where we're going to have stories about Gedolim that people never heard before, that are inspiring and heartwarming, but also things that are from Hashem's world, from world history. Always extremely kosher, very careful that to be what I selected, but things are inspiring and interesting, like that Pulitzer Prize winner. An incredible story about when Aaron Kotler had to meet with the head of the mafia to help save some Yidden from Italy. Very verified. I brought a ton of sources and footnotes. The story of Brooklyn Lightning, who's a Jewish cyclist who passed up on his dream to compete in the Olympics, so he can compete, so he could keep Shabbos, and which ultimately saved his life. We talk about a story where Klein's Ice Cream went above and beyond, saving their competitor, Mahadran Ice Cream. Incredible story that not a lot of people know. During the blackout of 2003, where they went above and beyond and they made sure to help their competitors, which Mikam Chishal, where else do you see that? I also brought some interesting ideas, some stories. The 2010 study conducted by psychologists, which discovered that unless we actively work on it, the human mind is in a constant state of distraction, which is something we see in the Svarim, we see in the Mesilas Yesharim, but just some studies just to help to highlight it. And then, some other cool stories we can go through.
So also what jumps out to me is not all your stories are Jewish, right? You bring from a variety of sources when it comes to the stories.
So I yes, and to your point, I think I heard this in the names of Rabbi Rieti, not that there's a tremendous significance necessarily to the English language, but history, give a capital H-I-S, his story. The Rebbeinu Shalom is writing history. The Rebbeinu Shalom has been always running the world. And if you look in history, I don't know if I call it Goyish history, I'd say Jewish, actual world history, there are some incredible stories out there that are completely kosher, but incredibly fascinating and really underline profound messages.
So do you have a specific example to share with the listeners of where you take a story or something and you weave it together with the Torah, with some of the, like you said, Rishonim, Achronim? Another thing, you said about sourcing, we should mention this also, which is very nice that you do, and sometimes these type of svarim don't have this. In the beginning, you have a whole list in alphabetical order of all the different people's svarim that you quote. So you have a whole list of this is who I'm going to be quoting. And in the book, you try to say who it is. So you do try to source things, which is quite nice. But if you have a specific example to share.
Sure. So I'm one of the ones that were quite popular is, in Parshas Tazriim and Torah, it talks about the veil of lashon hara. As we all know, that lashon hara is super serious. There's Makarios that say it's one of the most worst severest person can commit. The Gemara says it's equal and as heinous as murder, adultery, avodah zarah. Again, you have to understand exactly the nuances. So I was pointing out that strangely, the size of the punishment, the tzuras, can sometimes be quite minor. Although we know that sometimes it can cover the entire body, technically speaking, it could be as small as a quarter. So it could be a little difficult to understand, right? Let's appreciate the questions. And by the format, there's always a question, a story to underline the answer, and then the concrete takeaway, followed by a summary page, which is easy. So, for example, over here, the question would be difficult to understand how a relatively small mark on one's body is a fitting punishment. We know that Hashem punishes everyone in a midah keneged midah, quid pro quo, and nothing more, nothing less than the avera deserves. So if lashon hara is such a serious avera, why is it that it could just be such a small part of the skin? Why doesn't Hashem just cover the entire body every time that somebody speaks lashon hara? Also, we know that Hashem doesn't just punish us for the sake of punishing us. Hashem doesn't get any enjoyment of punishing us. It's supposed to teach us a lesson. So what lesson does the sometimes small size of tzuras teach us regarding the avera of lashon hara? Fair question? Okay, so here's a fascinating story. Again, history, Kadosh Baruch Hu story. Here we go. A little bit about the Pulitzer Prize. So established in 1917, the Pulitzer Prize is regarded as, in the secular world as the highest national honor in print journalism, literary achievement, and musical composition. One photograph in particular, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1969, and which was one of the most famous photos of the 20th century, was taken by a famous war photographer. His name was Eddie Adams. The name, you can look this up yourself, whatever, in the library, Google, or whatever you're comfortable with, is called Sagan Execution. And it depicted a general in the South Vietnamese army, which was America's ally at the time, executing, and it looked like in an appalling, cold-blooded fashion, an unarmed civilian from the enemy country. That prize-winning photo, which Pulitzer Prize-winning photo, deeply contributed to worldwide condemnation of the general and the war effort that was going on. In fact, due to that particular photo and its global attention, the general who was seen executing that civilian was dishonorably discharged from the army, and the remainder of his life was quite difficult. In fact, when he later became injured and faced amputation, no hospital wanted to care for him. Nobody wanted to touch him. He was toxic. When he opened up a restaurant, locals threatened his life and vandalized his business. He was even prosecuted for war crimes and faced deportation. Now, here's the interesting thing. Interestingly, according to all eyewitness accounts, and even according to the photographer himself, Eddie Adams, who took the picture, the actual circumstances of the incident, which were not caught on film, were not at all as the picture had portrayed. What do I mean? That civilian, quote unquote, that was in civilian clothing, was actually an enemy combatant who had put on civilian clothing so he can sneak into their camp in order to go unnoticed. And that very morning had led a hit team of murderous mercenaries who killed 34 people, many of which were unarmed family members of the general's battalion. They were just brutally attacked. Objectively, when the general found him, and mind you, right before the picture was taken, the attack was in the middle of ongoing. So when the general got to him, he did what any general in an army is supposed to do. He did nothing wrong, and he terminated him, which is sad. But the picture did not portray the full story. In fact, they say that this particular general had an outstanding reputation for compassion, and he was even known for restricting violence of American combat operations in the Mekong Delta. He was known to normally be on the right side of things. But at the end of the day, none of that made a difference. Eddie Adams' misleading Pulitzer Prize-winning photo, which only captured but a millisecond of the story, was burned into the public psyche of millions. Adams, the photographer, felt very guilty about what happened to the general and how the picture misportrayed the situation. He publicly admitted the truth and said, and he was actually brought on to testify when they wanted to deport the general. He actually testified on behalf of the general, and in the trial he said 2 people died in that photograph. The recipient as well as the general. And he said the following words: "I killed the general with my camera. Photographs are the most powerful weapons in the world. People believe them, but photographs do lie, even without manipulation. They're only half-truths. One can learn from here how one snapshot of a person's actions often do not accurately capture who the person is, nor the circumstances one is being portrayed in. This point is especially important nowadays, when one embarrassing photo can go viral, as we know, and can ruin somebody's life." So that's the story. Let's go through the answer. So the answer that we highlight in the Making It Real section, each section has a Making It Real. That's the cover of the Sefer. How do we make it real and really live this practically? Lashon Hara, while technically true, if it's a lie, it would be Moshe Shemra, is actually the most horrible kind of lie. Why? Because Lashon Hara is like a photograph. It's a fleeting glimpse of a terrible act that a person committed. But where's the context? Who is that person in reality? Is it fair for us to paint that person's entire being by that fleeting act? Is that who they really are? Doesn't everyone make mistakes? Like, you're going to take that one thing and blow it out of proportion? This is why the punishment of Lashon Hara is saras. A little discoloration, even the size of a quarter. Right back to our question, why such a small discoloration? Even the size of the quarter now comes to define the entire person. This is a perfect midah keneged midah and teaches us the lesson that Hashem is trying to portray. For it's exactly what the person speaking Lashon Hara did. Took a relatively small, right, compared to the person's entire life, an embarrassing little piece of the person, portrayed as the entirety of that person's identity. So too tzaras is a small little thing that's going to come and change that person's identity and make him a mitzvah. So that's ultimately the lesson, and the practical takeaway that we try to put in there is that everyone should bear this in mind and try to stay far away from speaking Lashon Hara or listening to it. And if you do hear it, let's remember that we don't have the full context. That this is just a snapshot of the incident, and that things aren't often as they appear. That one incident does not define a person's essence, and to give every year the same benefit of the doubt that we would want others to give us.
Very nice. And as you said, those are the different sections. Then you have the summary. And in the summary, which is like a gray box, you break down each one, each part of it. Now let's talk about something you have in the beginning, which I mentioned before. You say a word about this book's cover and layout. And then you have front cover, interior layout, which is nice that you explain. And so once it's there, let's explain what is going on the colorful front cover. And, we kind of explain the interior layout, but I guess just to summarize and just to really clarify for the listener what's going on in this book.
Sure, sure. So I mean, listen, Mosaica, one of the reasons why I love them is they're great with their covers. They have a mantra. They say, anyone who says that you don't judge a book by its cover clearly never read a book. So what I love about Mosaica is that they did a great job with it. It's beautiful. I've heard a lot of people say they want to put this on their coffee table, even if they don't plan to read it, or even after they finish the book. It looks like a piece of art, which is beautiful. And the front cover, their graphic design team explained a whole message behind it. How tapestry on the front cover represents the Torah. It's beautiful, multi-layered. Torah is full of depth. The needle and the thread running through it symbolize the process of taking the Torah's wisdom and actively weaving into the fabric of our lives. It's one thing to just learn Torah in the base medrash, but living it in our daily lives is of equal importance.
Okay, so exactly. Mosaica does a very nice job. Also agree that they have very nice cover design. Not only do you have a nice design, they even have a little bit of a raise. Some of it's like textured, and you can see the gold and with the thread, and some of the needle with needle and thread, which is very nice. And also very nice cover layout inside throughout the Sefer. Also, it's worth pointing out regarding the Sefer, like I said, you also have a glossary. You also have in the beginning, we mentioned that you have that list of sources that who you're quoting, and then you have also, that kind of that larger table of contents where it kind of breaks it down a little bit more than just little short header like Parshas Bereshis, Parshas Noach. You actually have a little bit more. You give the kind of sometimes in these you see that in Sfarim more often, but you don't always see that inside of an English Sefer. And then you also nicely put a like kind of a bookmark, the book string in here, which not so common in English Sfarim. So that's nice that you did that. That definitely does cost more for the to publish. So it's nice that you did that as well. Okay, now let's basically finish with. So who would you say this Sefer is for?
So great questions. Like I mentioned, I really tried to apply to a broad readership. I myself, I'd like to think that I come from a pretty diverse background. On the one hand, I learned from Sifta Psek, Yeshiva Gedel Psek under Meir Stern at BMG. On the other hand, when I moved to Baltimore, I learned in Eretz Yisrael. I'm currently working in the nursing home world. So I've come in contact with, from the most yeshivish, groups of Klal Yisrael, and I work with everybody in between. Including people, Goyim in the workforce as well. And every single chapter was written in a positive way of what is something that's just uplifting, inspiring, that anybody could appreciate, both from the question, the answer, the story, the message, both from if one of my Goyish coworkers picked it up to, a Rosh Yeshiva, that everyone would say, what, this was great. This had a great question that I enjoyed. That was never thought about that question. As a great answer that really answers it. It's not something fluffy. It answers it on the nose. Had an awesome story that really made it exciting. And yeah, this is practical. Like I could actually apply this. I know exactly how to put this into practice or make it real, this coming week.
So you mentioned in the introduction how someone called you after your first book is published and he asked you, so I really liked it. When's the next one coming out? Are you working on more? And is it going to be Al Torah again, or you have other ideas in mind?
That's a great question. I actually appreciate you asking this because, nobody really understands what goes into a skill set until you've done it. I find that in the business world, especially, everyone thinks that the other industry is easy. You have nursing home people that wish they could go into real estate. You have real estate that wish they could go into nursing homes. You have other people that probably think, hey, maybe making a podcast is the easiest thing. And then you get into those shoes, you see how difficult it is. So I can say that everyone can read more about that in the acknowledgments, this particular piece, but the amount of time that I personally put into this, thousands and thousands of hours, just researching thousands of different Torah and being very particular to nitpick exactly which one be inspiring. I'm trying to save the reader the time of having to go through everything. So try to find the most inspiring piece, try to find an answer that's most inspiring. I've gone through hundreds, if not thousands of stories to find one that's not just reliable, but also inspiring. It also ties in well to the story and everything else. So it was a labor of love. It took more hours than anyone can even imagine. I hope the readers appreciate that and see that between the lines when they write it. So I don't know if I'm going to be writing another one today. Let's still have to catch my breath. But at the same time, I absolutely, anytime I come across an incredible story or an incredible Dvar Torah, I still, to this day, I'm currently writing this down. I just wrote one down on Friday. And honestly, I would really recommend to any listeners, everyone, whenever you hear a great piece, a great Dvar Torah, an inspirational story, you're always convinced like, okay, I got this. I filed it in my memory and I'll never forget it. I guarantee you, for most, with almost without exception, a year later, you rarely remember it. 10 years later, you never do. If you hear something inspiring and you love it, do us all a favor, write it down, and maybe one day you'll share it with the world as well and be able to inspire them.
Very good piece of advice over there, Moshe. So Thank you for joining me. I will, as always, link to the book in the show notes for those interested. You can purchase it in the farm stores, Amazon, and Mosaica. Mosaica, as always, you can use the code CHATTER, CHATTER, 15% off. For those interested person there, so it'll be available over. I will link to it. Thank you, Moshe, for joining me.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.